I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. Esteemed colleagues, thank you very much for coming along to the first of the WISE talks. Many in this room know that I'm not wise, but it is true that I am wiser. Wiser than yesterday, wiser than last week, wiser than last month. And why is that? Feedback. In singing the praises of feedback, though, it's easy to gloss over the fact that it can be painful. When we encourage young colleagues to become teachers, we usually don't get informed consent. We don't tell them that the journey may involve some pain, even some humiliation. I give a talk regularly about febrile preschoolers going to the doctor. These days, it is always well received by medical students, registrars or peers. But less experienced colleagues hear the applause and some of them wonder why they can't extract the same warmth from the same audience. What they don't see is that it took decades to get that talk into shape. Feedback over decades has often been negative and not easy to hear. Seinfeld got this. After finishing his TV series, he prepared a solo stand-up show. Once the new show was drafted, he took it around the back blocks of America for 12 months. So he had a lot of feedback before opening on Broadway. By the opening, he had perfected each pause. He knew exactly when and how long his audience would laugh. And the critics in New York praised the opening and his natural talent, completely missing the fact that they were enjoying the fruit of a performance which had been refined by a lot of feedback. A long time ago, I was seeing my last patient for the morning, a new patient. I was running late for a tutorial at the hospital. This child and her parents had been kept waiting. The medical students were also waiting. The consult seemed to go well, and I dashed off to give the tutorial. Several weeks passed, and then I got a closely typed 3-page letter of complaint. The father was a solicitor. The mother was a health academic. The letter was scarifying and personal. It included passages like, "You think you are so superior sitting over there in your bow tie." I know you've got to love feedback, but it's not always easy. After quite a lot of thinking, I wrote the letter in response. In writing, I apologised for the fact that the consultation had not met their needs. I thanked them for taking the time and trouble to write, and I wrote that without their feedback, I would have missed the opportunity to improvement that is clearly needed. It slowly dawned on me that my behaviour and body language during that consultation had been affected by my preoccupation with the impending tutorial and the fact that I was running late. Those parents had no idea that there was a tutorial or that I was anxious about running late. So they had no option but to mind read, and I reckon they read my body language and behaviour as disrespectful. Since then, if I have something on my mind that is not central to the patient's concern, I declare it. I might say, "I've got this rotten headache, please excuse me if I seem to lose focus." Or, "I'm really worried about a patient I saw earlier today, forgive me if I'm distracted." Or, "I've got to be on a plane to the Gold Coast in 2 hours. That angry, negative feedback so long ago opened my eyes and improved my consulting skills. No feedback, no improvement. The angry letter was a gift. And ironically, the tutorial was on communication skills. Positive feedback can be lovely. I'd finished a consultation with a young couple recently arrived from India. They had come with concern about their baby who cried a lot. In taking their leave, the father said, "Today we have met a more than doctor." As you will see, this lovely positive feedback does not always produce a good outcome. After that, consulting with another mother with a medical student sitting in. This mother had been a successful manager. She was used to being in charge. Then she had her first baby. The baby and the family were distressed. Just the set of problems, I thought, for the more than doctor. All seemed to go very well. But you've guessed it. Some days later, the practice manager told me that the mother had rung to formally complain about the consultation. Among several complaints was that Dr. Fasher had been theatrical and over the top in addressing the issue of attaching the baby to the breast. Critical reflection led me to several conclusions, and let me share two of them. First, the delightful feedback from the Indian dad had seeped into my subconscious. At some level, I'd come to believe that I was a more than doctor. Overconfidence/arrogance is a perfect precondition for failing in the patient-centred clinical method. Second, the over-the-top theatricality mentioned by the mother, on reflection, was likely to have been me showing off my consultation skills to the medical student rather than being totally available to the mother. It took a few days, but eventually I overcame my reluctance, picked up the phone and spoke with that mother. I said something like, "Thank you so much for the feedback. Sorry I was not helpful. I'm really grateful that you rang back. Without that, I would not have had a reason to work on improvements that are clearly needed." She responded by saying something like, "Thank you so much for ringing. I believe in feedback. I'm really happy it's been useful." Another kind of feedback. I ducked into the treatment room with the same medical student I'd hoped to be ducking in and ducking out. The practice nurse was checking a baby's growth and development prior to routine vaccination. The mother had a problem. She had a commitment to almond milk and feared the hormones in soy milk. My primitive brain heard this, and in less than a trillionth of a millisecond, it triggered irritable body language. My more sluggish cerebral cortex noted the irritable body language and took control. Thanks to cortical activity, calm and empathy prevailed. On getting back to the consulting room, I asked the medical student, "Did you see that?" "Yep," he said. He saw that lightning-fast feedback well. We're nearly done. Let me tell you about an external clinical visit from early this year. Again, it was a visit that went really, really well. Now, I knew that because the registrar in question and her colleague dropped in at the local cafe where I'd gone to have a bite to eat. And we had a lovely chat. Again, I'm sure you've guessed it. A month or so later, the principal of that practice drew me aside and asked if I remembered the visit. I said I did. He reported that the registrar found the experience totally overwhelming. I made a run late and she found it all too much. Since that day, I've been careful to rein in my energetic enthusiasm. These days, I cultivate starting out ECT visits being quiet and in the moment present, putting into practice that attentive listening so long the subject of my evangelistic zeal. Subsequent registrars have benefited from this feedback, delayed and fortuitous though it was. Sadly, this feedback came in the twilight of my ECT visiting career. The story for me gives a rueful ring to the trope that the good GP never stops learning. Do they really mean never? Well, I'm 72 years old, colleagues, and I'm here to say to you that they do mean never. Let's finish with a story from Ian Collis, who is a senior manager at Wentwest. He has a collection of pithy and instructive stories. He tells of a professor who was attending a departmental meeting at which student feedback was being discussed. On discovering that the feedback was critical of his lectures, the professor stormed out, raging, I am not going to be judged by a bunch of undergraduates. And anyway, I'm sick of hearing the same feedback year in, year out. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We've got a couple of minutes. Anyone want to ask Michael some questions from his anecdotes about feedback?
Do you sort of have any way to ask feedback to applications? Do you do questionnaires or something?
Yeah, we do that. A colleague who I ran this talk by says she is now asks everybody for feedback on the spot. But I think that the feedback you get after people have gone away and had a think is different from the feedback you get if you ask for it immediately.
How do you deal with feedback on Facebook?
I deal with feedback on Facebook by not knowing how to get onto Facebook. But somebody did tell me the other day that you should do your own search to see what other people are defaming, how other people are defaming you. And that colleague said, don't use Google because that's where all the nice stuff is. You've got to go onto the dark web.
One more question. Okay, thank you, Michael.